A $200,000 champion horse, the wrong address, and a 9-year-old boy who doesn't speak. What happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about success. The GPS signal flickered twice before directing the horse trailer down a narrow dirt road in rural Colorado. Behind the wheel, Marcus Sullivan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his gut screaming something was terribly wrong. The address showed Riverbend Ranch, but the property stretching before him looked nothing like the high-end equestrian facility he'd been promised. Instead, through the dusty windshield, he saw a weathered therapeutic riding center with a sun-faded sign reading Riverbend Hope Stables. A handful of modest paddocks surrounded a converted barn, and in the distance, an elderly woman in mud-stained overalls was leading what appeared to be a miniature pony. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus muttered, his truck's dying transmission grinding ominously as he parked beside the barn. The woman who introduced herself as Margaret Chen, 73, walked over with a puzzled expression creasing her sun-weathered face. Her hands were calloused from decades of ranch work, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Can I help you, son? I have a delivery here for Riverbend Ranch," Marcus said, already sensing the catastrophic error. "A gelding named Shadow's Verdict. Premium competition jumper valued at around $200,000 according to these papers." Margaret's eyes widened behind her thick glasses. "Son, I think you've got the wrong Riverbend. This here is Riverbend Hope Stables. We work with special needs children. The fancy ranch you're looking for is probably Riverbend Estates, about 40 miles north." But Marcus's boss had been crystal clear about making this delivery before nightfall, and the sun was already sinking blood red toward the horizon. Besides, his truck's transmission had been making ominous grinding noises for the last 50 miles. One more. Trip might kill it completely. "Look, ma'am, my paperwork says Riverbend Ranch, this county. Once I unload him, you contact whoever sent him. I'm just following orders." Before Margaret could protest, Marcus was already unlatching the trailer door with practiced efficiency. What emerged made Margaret's breath catch in her throat. The magnificent horse nobody wanted was about to meet the only person who could save him. His breeding was flawless. His training cost a fortune. But when Margaret looked into Shadow's Verdict's eyes, she saw something that made her blood run cold, and she knew immediately that someone had destroyed this animal's soul. Shadow's Verdict stood 17 hands tall, a stunning black warm blood with a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian in the fading Colorado light. His muscular build and elegant conformation spoke of years of careful breeding and 6-figure training investments. Every line of his body screamed champion, but it was his eyes that stopped Margaret cold. They weren't wild or spirited as you'd expect from a premium jumper. They were empty, completely, devastatingly empty. Like looking into the eyes of someone who'd been broken so thoroughly, they'd simply stopped trying to exist. Margaret had seen that look before, in rescue horses that had suffered unspeakable abuse. "Sweet mercy," she whispered, unconsciously stepping back as the horse was led into a temporary paddock. She could see the telltale signs immediately. Old, pressure marks on his mouth where a harsh bit had been used repeatedly, the way he flinched at sudden movements, the hollow way he stood, physically present but mentally absent. His ears didn't swivel toward sounds, his nostrils barely flared. This wasn't just a tired horse, this was a horse who'd given up. Marcus handed her a thick manila envelope, clearly eager to escape. "All his documentation is in there. Good luck, ma'am." His tone carried a warning Margaret didn't understand yet. "You're gonna need it." As the trailer disappeared down the dirt road in a cloud of dust, Margaret found herself alone with a horse worth more than her entire property. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and began reading. What she discovered in those pages made her stomach turn. Shadow's Verdict had been returned by 3 different buyers in the last 8 months, But these weren't just routine returns. Each rejection told a darker story. Refuses to jump. Unpredictable behavior. Dangerous for competitive riding? The clinical language barely masked the tragedy underneath, but one trainer's note cut deepest. Beautiful horse, broken spirit. Someone pushed him beyond his breaking point. Recommend immediate retirement. He'll never compete again. What Margaret didn't know was that this broken horse was about to do something impossible. Margaret thought she understood broken horses, but when her granddaughter read the full medical history, they discovered shadows. Verdict had been through something far worse than anyone imagined. "Grandma Margaret, what in the world is that? A world-class warm blood?" Emma Chen, Margaret's 29-year-old granddaughter and occupational therapist, had arrived the next morning for their weekly therapy sessions. She stopped dead when she saw Shadow's verdict standing motionless in the paddock, and her clinical eye immediately caught the signs Margaret had missed. "That's Shadow's verdict," Margaret replied, her voice heavy with concern. "Got delivered here by mistake yesterday. According to his papers, he's worth $200,000 and has been rejected by everyone who's tried to work with him." Emma took the documents from Margaret's weathered hands and began reading, her professional training making her focus on details others might overlook. What she found made her jaw tighten. "Grandma, look at the dates. His last 3 owners had him for less than 8 weeks each. And these training notes," she pointed to a section, highlighted in red. "They used forced flooding techniques. Do you know what that means?" Margaret shook her head, watching the horse through the fence. "It means they deliberately terrified him over and over, trying to desensitize him to jumps by forcing him through fear until he shut down completely. It's brutal, inhumane, and it's left him with severe learned helplessness." In plain English, someone tortured this horse into compliance, and when that didn't work, they broke him instead. Emma's voice cracked with anger. "He's not dangerous, Grandma. He's traumatized. Every time someone tried to make him jump, he relived that trauma until he just stopped trying to survive it." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes as she watched Shadow's verdict stand there, barely breathing. "The trailer company called this morning. They're trying to locate his actual owner, some billionaire named Christopher Blackwood, who's unreachable on a business trip in Asia. Until they sort it out, he stays here." Emma studied the horse thoughtfully. Maybe that mistake was meant to happen, because in 3 hours, something would happen that defied every rule in Emma's clinical textbooks. If emotional animal stories like this touch your heart, make sure you're subscribed. What happens next will absolutely floor you. Tyler was 9 years old and hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. His mother had almost given up hope. Then Tyler saw Shadow's verdict, and what happened next left everyone speechless, literally. That evening, during the regular therapy session, something unprecedented occurred. One of Margaret's students, a 9-year-old boy named Tyler who had autism and selective mutism, broke from his usual routine the moment he arrived. Tyler's mother had warned Margaret that morning. "He hasn't said a word in 6 weeks. His therapists think he's regressing." But the moment Tyler saw Shadow's verdict through the barn window, something shifted in his expression. Without warning, without permission, he walked straight toward the paddock with unusual determination. "Tyler, wait!" Margaret started moving, but Emma grabbed her arm. Before anyone could stop him, Tyler had climbed through the fence rails with surprising agility and was standing directly in front of the massive horse. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. A horse this size, this traumatized, could seriously injure a child, especially one who might not read warning signs properly. But as Margaret rushed closer, ready to intervene, she saw something that made her freeze mid-step. Shadow's verdict had lowered his enormous head slowly, deliberately, until it was level with Tyler's face. The boy reached out one small hand, movements careful and gentle, and placed it on the horse's muzzle. Neither moved, neither breathed. They simply stood there in the fading Colorado sunlight, 2 beings who lived mostly in their own isolated worlds, somehow finding a moment of perfect, wordless, understanding. "Don't move," Emma whispered beside Margaret, her clinical training battling what she was witnessing. "Just watch." For 5 eternal minutes, the boy and horse stood together in absolute silence. The other children had stopped playing. The therapy assistant stood frozen. Even the birds seemed to quiet. Then Tyler spoke, his voice clear and strong in a way his teachers said rarely happened anymore. "You're sad. I get sad sometimes too, but it's okay to be sad. You're safe here." When Tyler finally walked back through the fence, he was smiling, something his mother said he hadn't done in months, and Shadow's verdict watched him go. For the first time since arriving, there was something beyond emptiness in the horse's dark eyes, just a flicker, but it was there. What neither Margaret nor Emma realized was that Tyler had just unlocked something everyone else had failed to reach. Margaret made a decision that night that would either save Shadow's verdict or destroy everything she'd built, but she had to try because she'd just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table staring at the phone number listed in Shadow's verdict's documentation. The business card read, "Christopher Blackwood, Blackwood Investment Group." Below it, an assistant's contact information. She knew what she was about to propose was crazy. She was a 73-year-old woman running a struggling therapeutic riding center, asking a billionaire to let her keep his $200,000 horse. But that moment between Tyler and Shadow's verdict had changed something fundamental in her understanding. She dialed the number and left a message that would alter all their lives. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Margaret Chen from Riverbend Hope Stables in Colorado. Your horse, Shadow's verdict, was delivered to us by mistake 2 days ago. But I need to ask you something important. Let him stay here for a while. No cost to you for his care. I believe he needs what we do here, and I know our children need him too. Please call me when you get this message." The response came 3 days later, not from Blackwood himself, but from his assistant Patricia, a harried-sounding woman who clearly had 100 other priorities. "Ms. Chen, Mr. Blackwood received your message. He says if you want to keep the horse temporarily, that's acceptable. He's currently deciding whether to sell Shadow's verdict or send him to a retirement facility anyway. The horse is fully insured, and all care costs are covered through a trust fund established at purchase. Just don't let anything happen to him, and we'll finalize arrangements when Mr. Blackwood returns from Singapore next month." When Margaret reported the conversation to Emma, her granddaughter raised an eyebrow. "So basically, we're free horse-sitting for a billionaire who can't decide what to do with his failed investment." "Or," Margaret countered, her eyes bright with determination, "we've been given 30 days to prove that everyone's been measuring the wrong kind of value." Emma looked out at the paddock where Shadow's verdict stood and where Tyler was already asking to visit again. "Okay, Grandma, 30 days. Let's see if miracles still happen." What they didn't know was that the real miracle was just beginning. For 7 days, Shadow's verdict remained a ghost. Then on day 8, something happened that made Emma grab her phone and start recording, because nobody would believe this without proof. The first week passed slowly. Shadow's verdict remained emotionally disconnected, going through the motions of eating and drinking, but showing no interest in anything around him. He was a living statue, beautiful but lifeless. Margaret didn't try to ride him or train him or fix him. She simply let him exist. Every morning at sunrise, she'd carry a bucket to his paddock, sit outside his stall, and talk to him about nothing in particular, the weather, her late husband, the children coming for therapy that day. "You know what I've learned in 50 years working with animals?" she told him one morning, watching the sun paint the Colorado mountains gold. "Broken things don't need fixing. They need patience. They need someone to sit with them and say, it's okay to be broken for a while." The horse never responded, but Margaret kept showing up. Day 8 changed everything. Tyler's mother brought him for his regular Tuesday session. The moment he arrived, Tyler asked to see the sad horse again. Margaret, trusting her instincts despite her better judgment, allowed him supervised time in the paddock. Tyler didn't try to ride Shadow's verdict or put a halter on him. He simply sat cross-legged in the grass nearby and drew pictures in his notebook, occasionally narrating his drawings to the horse in that clear, careful voice. "This is you," Tyler said, holding up a crayon drawing of a black horse. "And this is me. We're friends." Emma watched from outside the fence, her phone recording, as something impossible unfolded over the next hour. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Shadow's verdict moved closer. First one step, then another, until he was standing directly above the boy, his massive body providing shade from the morning sun. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for an animal his size, the horse lowered himself to the ground and laid down beside Tyler. Emma's hands shook as she filmed. Horses don't typically lie down in the presence of strangers. It's a position of complete vulnerability. For a traumatized horse to do this was unprecedented. Tyler looked up from his drawing and smiled. Then he did something that made Emma's breath catch. He leaned against the horse's warm shoulder and simply sat there, both of them peaceful, both of them healing. This moment would change Shadow's verdict's life forever. But first, something dangerous was about to happen. Day 15. Shadow's verdict had just started to trust. Again. Then, a visiting child did something that should have triggered a violent reaction. What the horse did instead left the entire staff in tears. By the third week, word had spread among the families. Children were specifically requesting to meet the new horse, and Margaret found herself carefully managing an unexpected waiting list. She established strict rules: no sudden movements, no loud noises, always supervised, and only children who demonstrated appropriate, gentle behavior could interact with him. The results were remarkable. A girl named Sophie with cerebral palsy, who usually struggled with confidence, sat beside Shadow's verdict for an hour and read her favorite book aloud, all 47 pages. Her mother reported it was the longest Sophie had ever sustained focus on a single activity. A teenager named Marcus with severe anxiety spent 20 minutes brushing Shadow's verdict's mane in concentrated silence, his usual fidgeting completely absent. "It's the first time in 6 months I've seen him that calm," his therapist whispered to Emma, but day 15 brought the moment that convinced Margaret something profound was happening. A 7-year-old boy named Danny, who had ADHD and impulse control challenges, was meeting Shadow's verdict for the first time. Despite multiple warnings, Danny suddenly threw his arms wide and shouted, "Horse!" at full volume while running directly at the paddock fence. Every adult moved at once, expecting Shadow's verdict to bolt or rear, both dangerous reactions for a horse his size in an enclosed space. A traumatized horse, startled like that, could seriously injure himself or others. But Shadow's verdict didn't bolt. He turned his head slowly toward Danny, took 2 calm steps toward the fence, and lowered his nose to the boy's eye level. Then he exhaled, a long, gentle breath that ruffled Danny's hair. Danny froze, his eyes wide. "He's not scared," the boy whispered, suddenly quiet. "Why isn't he scared?" "Because," Margaret said softly, feeling tears sting her eyes, "he understands you. He knows what it's like when your emotions are too big for your body." That afternoon, Shadow's verdict actually played, for the first time since arriving. He trotted in circles around his paddock with energy that looked almost like joy, tossing his head and nickering softly. When he saw Margaret, he came directly to the fence and nudged her shoulder with his nose. "Welcome back, beautiful boy," she whispered. Welcome back. But their peaceful progress was about to be shattered by a single phone call. Day 28. The phone rang and Margaret's heart sank. The billionaire owner had finally called back, and his words threatened to destroy everything. "I'm sending a trailer next week to pick him up." That afternoon, Christopher Blackwood finally called personally after 4 weeks of silence. His voice was crisp, businesslike, with the efficient tone of someone who made million-dollar decisions before breakfast. "Ms. Chen, I understand my horse has been staying at your facility. I appreciate you handling this situation. I'll be sending a trailer to pick him up next Tuesday. I found a retirement farm in Virginia that will take him." Margaret's heart dropped into her stomach. "Mr. Blackwood, I know he's your horse, and you can do whatever you want with him, but please, I need to tell you something important before you make a final decision." "Ms. Chen, I'm quite busy. Shadow's verdict is coming back to life here," Margaret interrupted, her voice shaking but determined. "He's connecting with our therapy students in ways I've never seen in 50 years of working with horses. Please, just come visit before you decide. See what's happening here with your own eyes. That's all I'm asking. One visit." There was a long pause. Margaret could hear the clicking of a keyboard, the efficient sounds of a man managing an empire. "Ms. Chen, I paid $200,000 for that horse. He can't even do the one thing he was bred and trained for. I don't see how playing with disabled children is a good use of a high-quality warm blood's potential." The words stung like a slap, but Margaret forced herself to stay calm. "With all due respect, sir, I think you're measuring the wrong kind of potential. Sometimes the most valuable thing isn't what someone can do, it's who they can help." Another pause, longer this time. "Where exactly are you located?" "Riverbend Hope Stables, about 40 miles south of Denver." "I'll be in Colorado Springs on Thursday for a business meeting. I can stop by for 30 minutes. But Ms. Chen, I'm not changing my mind. The trailer still comes next Tuesday." The line went dead. Margaret looked at Emma, who'd been listening to the entire conversation. "We have 3 days to show him something worth more than $200,000. Emma nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make Thursday count." What happened on Thursday would change a billionaire's entire understanding of success. If this story is keeping you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because what happens when the billionaire arrives will absolutely blow your mind. Christopher Blackwood arrived in a $200,000 Mercedes to collect his $200,000 horse. But what 6 children showed him in the next 60 minutes would prove that some things are priceless. Thursday arrived too quickly. Christopher Blackwood pulled up at exactly 2 p.m. in a gleaming black Mercedes that looked absurdly out of place next to Margaret's rusty pickup truck and sun-faded barn. He was exactly what Margaret expected. Late 50s, expensive charcoal suit slightly loosened for the rural environment, Italian leather shoes already gathering dust. The kind of man accustomed to things being quantified, optimized, and monetized. His expression as he surveyed the modest facilities was politely skeptical. "I'll be honest, Ms. Chen," he said, checking his Rolex. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to see here. I have a 4 p.m. conference call, so let's make this quick." "Just watch," Margaret said simply, leading him toward the riding arena, where Emma was conducting a therapy session. "Give us 30 minutes. That's all I ask." What Christopher Blackwood witnessed in the next half hour shattered every assumption he'd held about horses, value, and success. 6 children were in the arena, ranging from age 7 to 14, each with different challenges. Tyler was there, along with Sophie, cerebral palsy, Marcus, anxiety disorder, Danny, ADHD, and 2 others. And at the center of everything was Shadow's verdict. No saddle, no bridle, just a simple rope halter. But these children weren't riding the horse. They were doing something Blackwood had never seen. They were playing together. Tyler led Shadow's verdict through an elaborate obstacle course of colored cones that the children had designed. When the horse completed it, all 6 children cheered, and Shadow's verdict tossed his head in what looked remarkably like pride. Sophie, who struggled with motor control, held up a large ball. Shadow's verdict walked over, took it gently in his teeth, and carried it to a designated spot, a game they'd clearly played before. When Marcus accidentally dropped his shoe in the middle of the arena, Shadow's verdict picked it up without being asked and brought it back to him. The teenager laughed, the first time Blackwood saw him smile, but the moment that broke Blackwood came when Danny, the impulsive 7-year-old, suddenly sat down in the dirt and started crying, clearly overwhelmed by something. Shadow's verdict immediately walked over, lowered himself to the ground beside the boy, and simply waited. Danny leaned against the horse's warm shoulder, and the crying gradually stopped. What Blackwood did next would seal Shadow's verdict's fate forever. The billionaire stood in that dusty paddock, his $3,000 suit covered in dirt and horsehair, tears streaming down his face. And what he said next changed everything. After the session ended, Blackwood asked to see Shadow's verdict alone. Margaret supervised from a distance, her heart in her throat, as the businessman entered the paddock, probably the first time he'd been this close to the horse since purchasing him nearly a year ago. "I was told you're a completely different horse now," Blackwood said quietly, standing a few feet away. His voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Everyone said you were broken beyond repair." Shadow's verdict studied him calmly, showing none of the anxiety or shutdown behavior that had defined him for months. The horse took one step forward, then another. Then he did something that made Blackwood's breath catch in his throat. Shadow's verdict walked directly up to him and rested his enormous head against the businessman's chest. The same gesture of trust he'd been showing the children. The same gesture he'd refused to show any of his previous owners. Margaret watched from outside the fence as something cracked in Christopher Blackwood's carefully constructed armor. She saw the exact moment when a $200,000 asset became a living being with feelings. When an investment became a friend, when numbers became a heartbeat. When Blackwood emerged from the paddock 10 minutes later, his expensive suit was covered in horsehair and Colorado dust. His eyes were red, his voice thick. "Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something." "Of course." "If I were to donate Shadow's verdict into your facility, would you be able to care for him long-term?" Margaret's heart leaped, but honesty forced her to hesitate. "Mr. Blackwood, with all respect, we're barely making ends meet as it is. I can't afford to feed a horse like him premium grain, and I certainly can't afford his medical care or insurance. What if I established a charitable trust specifically for his care, enough to cover all his expenses for the rest of his life, plus $50,000 annually to support your facilities and programs?" Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Blackwood looked back at the paddock, where Shadow's verdict was now surrounded by children, all of them peaceful, all of them healing. "Because I just watched a horse I paid $200,000 for do something worth infinitely more than winning competitions. He gave those children confidence, connection, and joy. That's not a failed investment, Ms. Chen. That's a successful transformation. I was just measuring the wrong kind of success." He paused, wiping his eyes. "My daughter struggles with depression. She's 15. Would it be okay if I brought her here next week?" 3 weeks later, Shadow's verdict officially became part of Riverbend Hope Stables, with a trust fund ensuring his care forever. The rejected champion had finally found his true purpose. Sometimes the wrong address is exactly where you're meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear about second chances. Every day, we bring you stories that remind us why animals are such incredible healers and teachers. Hit that like button if you believe every soul deserves to find their true purpose. And leave a comment telling us about an animal that changed your life. Remember, sometimes the greatest rescues aren't about saving lives. They're about giving purpose to souls everyone else gave up on. See you in the next story.